Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at Path of Exile 2, as I wanted to give my thoughts on the game's early access so far. Now, just a little background here, I'm essentially brand new to the PoE franchise. I did try out the first game once many moons ago, but I only put like just under 50 hours into it, which in PoE terms, that's like the equivalent of not even clicking on the tutorial, so I'm essentially a total noob. I have put quite some time into other ARPGs in the past though, most notably Diablo, having played all of the titles, although most of my time investment in those was in Diablo 2 Resurrected and Diablo 3. But setting all that aside, I gotta say, I was excited for PoE 2. Like a lot of folks, I was pretty disappointed in Diablo 4. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it at all. I did put a decent amount of time into it, but something about it just didn't click with me enough to entice me to keep consistently playing it. From the moment I saw gameplay of PoE 2 though, I was very intrigued. Something about it just made me think, okay, this is a Next Gen ARPG. And I think it's safe to say after having my hands on it, that it feels just like that. The first thing that really stands out to me are the visuals. My god, is this game pretty. Spell effects, enemies, environments, it's all presented beautifully. I don't think many would argue against this being one of, if not the best looking ARPG ever. And to top it off, it seems to be optimized pretty damn well. The inclusion of various upscaling techs like DLSS, FSR, and more really helps to ensure a smooth experience, and I can tell you I ran into very few technical issues during my playtime so far. I think I had maybe one single crash. And the visuals are complemented by an absolutely amazing soundtrack that fits perfectly with the aesthetics of the game. Yeah, the soundtrack is absolutely top tier, and just like the visuals, this is some of the best music I've heard in a game in this genre. So overall, absolute home run when it comes to presentation. GGG really knocked it out of the park here. But obviously, presentation isn't the only thing that matters. Its level of importance varies from person to person, but really it's sort of like icing on a cake. If your cake's still rancid, the icing really isn't that important then, is it? Well, thankfully, PoE 2's cake isn't anywhere close to rancid, it's actually pretty tasty, so let's talk gameplay. At this point, I've got just about 50 hours in the game, with the vast majority of that time being on a monk, so just keep that in mind because my opinion may have been vastly different if I'd played a different class. So unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard by now that the game is difficult, and have maybe even heard a phrase like Dark Souls Diablo or something along those lines floating around, and on the surface, that's a pretty true assessment. The game's on a whole nother level when it comes to punishing, especially if you're coming for a more quote-unquote casual ARPG like Diablo 4. Bosses and even just random packs of mobs are no joke, and if you don't pay attention to certain damage mechanics and utilize your dodge roll accordingly, you'll get absolutely wrecked. This particular mechanic is most likely going to be a pretty big point of contention for some. If you don't like the idea of having the dodge roll constantly, well, I don't really know what to tell you because as far as I can tell, it's something you're going to have to be doing pretty consistently in order to avoid damage, and even if you are utilizing this new mechanic, you're probably going to die a lot, especially as a melee class or in the beginning of your playtime. As of right now, having just completed Act 3, I've died over 80 times. Now to be fair, a good amount of those deaths, probably like 15 of them or so, came from attempting to complete the Trials of Chaos, which we'll touch on a bit later. But yeah, expect to die quite a bit, especially as you're learning things. A large part of the reason the game is so punishing though, isn't necessarily tied to the game's inherent difficulty. Yes, a good chunk of it is, and it is a difficult game, but a lot of it has more to do with decisions that you make as a player. There are certain things that you absolutely have to do if you don't want to beat your head against the wall, and it mostly revolves around doing certain things to improve your character's effectiveness. Like, for a lot of us that haven't played PoE or a game like this before, we might just automatically assume that gear sold by vendors is garbage and shouldn't be bothered with. Well, in this game, that's not the case. Sometimes grabbing a vendor item can be a big upgrade, and checking through their inventories is something that you should absolutely do periodically. The same goes for the game's crafting system. You absolutely need to utilize it to improve your character's effectiveness, and I gotta say, I'm a huge fan of it. From what I can tell, it seems like, at least a large majority of the time, the best gear you're going to get doesn't come from drops, but instead is created or augmented by players. The game uses currencies to achieve this, which we'll give a quick basic overview. As you progress through the game, both early on and into the later stages, you'll come across various types of these currency. Sometimes you'll get them from drops, but you can also earn them from disenchanting items. The most common types that you'll be working with early on are Orbs of Transmutation, Augmentation, and Regal Orbs. You may even run into an Exalted Orb or two if you get lucky, but those are pretty rare. What these allow you to do is take a base item with no affixes, so just like a regular white item, and craft on them. Or you can also do the same to any other item that drops. So in this example here, you can see me taking a staff, using an Orb of Transmutation on it to upgrade it to a magic item. Then I use an Augmentation Orb to add an additional affix to it. Then I use a Regal Orb to upgrade it to a rare item, adding a third affix. Which, by the way, I'm not sure if affix is the right term here, I'm just using it because I'm not super familiar with all the PoE lingo yet. If I had an Exalted Orb and I really liked the item, I could even use it to add up to 3 additional affixes. I really like this system, and even though I did have a very small amount of exposure to it from my past playtime with PoE, I was still a little intimidated by it initially, but I actually found it to be incredibly easy to pick up, understand, and use effectively. I'd say one of the biggest mistakes a new player can make is sitting on and not utilizing these crafting currencies. I think a lot of us have fallen victim to the thought pattern of, oh, that's valuable, let me save that for a later time in games, which that's something you definitely don't want to do here. You need to be using those currencies in order to increase your character's power level. And that brings me to my next topic, the game's passive skill tree. Now, the passive skill tree in PoE has always been absolutely wild, especially for someone on the outside looking in. Just like the currency system, it was always a bit intimidating to me. I'm happy to report that the passive tree in PoE 2, despite being even bigger than the first games, somehow, is actually fairly easy to navigate. You do have to do a bit of planning things out ahead in order to decide what you want to work towards, but the fact that the tree is no longer riddled with tons of nodes that increase life or defenses makes it so that I'm no longer guessing how many of those ones I need to take versus damage or other utility nodes. There are still some nodes that do things like increase your energy shield, evasion, life on hit, etc., but for the most part, this has been cut back pretty drastically. The result is what I think is a much more approachable skill tree. I just remember from my past experiences with PoE 1, trying to wing it on my first character and not follow a build guide, and yeah, the result was a total failure because I just had no idea how much of an emphasis I should have been putting on health and defense. I'm also a really big fan of how skills and gems are handled in the game, having them no longer be in your armor and weapon slots, but instead in a separate window was just more intuitive to me. And messing around with the various support gems that are offered, which these are additional gems that you can slot into your skills to change their behavior in various ways, it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed getting to mess around with them in order to try to make my skills much more effective and just seeing how things interact. In some ways, I was actually more excited to see these support gems drop than the skill gems themselves. Moving through the game's campaign was definitely a bit of a learning curve, but by the time I got through, I'd say about the middle of Act 2 or so, I felt I had a pretty good grasp on the basics of what I needed to do to improve my character. And let me tell you, the feeling of progression in this game is really strong. It's just about the best I've felt in an ARPG. The journey of going from a lowly monk who can barely DPS bosses to an absolute machine that does insane single target DPS was absolutely incredible. Along the way, I could feel the improvements that I was making to my character via passive skill choices and by improving equipment. Each little tick of 10% extra elemental damage here or there, equipping a new, better staff, it all gave me instant feedback that I could feel as I was mowing through waves of enemies. And by far the highlight of my campaign run were the boss encounters. Holy shit did they nail these. All in all, there are more than 40 unique boss fights in the first 3 acts of the game, each with their own unique mechanics. Some of these were a bit of a pain to get through, with a lot of mechanics that did really heavy damage or would even just one-shot me, but man, it was worth it. Bosses are sort of trivial in some games in this genre, but that's definitely not the case here. Some of the fights were real challenges, especially in the beginning when my monk's build wasn't quite put together, but as I progressed further and further, things got a little easier. By the time I made it to Act 3 and had what I would say was a fairly cohesive build, I could sort of melt bosses, although I did still have to be careful of certain boss mechanics, of course. I'd like to also mention here another thing that really stood out to me, and that's enemy variety. There are tons of different types of enemy monsters. Each act and its subsequent zones are just littered with variety. It's really a breath of fresh air, as this was one of my biggest complaints I had with Diablo 4 when it launched. The different types of monsters aren't just variations of pre-existing types either, they're unique in their own rights, and they just ooze quality. One thing that I wasn't expecting to think would be a big deal were the control options. I originally had no intentions of using WASD movement, but after giving it a try, man, I think it would be really hard to go back to standard point and click controls. Not only do I feel like I have much more precise control of my character, it's also taken a lot of strain off my hands, which in turn allows me to play the game for much longer periods of time without feeling any sort of discomfort. As a matter of fact, I've experienced no discomfort of any kind in my time with the game, and that's saying something because I've been going pretty hard on the game recently. The last time I put this much time into an ARPG in such a short time window was a couple of years ago when I returned to Diablo 3 for a season, and I could definitely feel some hand discomfort from it, so I think it's safe to say I'll be sticking to WASD or even giving the controller a go, which I've also heard really good things about, although I haven't personally tried yet. Really, my only major gripe with the game so far came from when attempting to get 3 additional ascendancy points by completing the Trials of Chaos. Dear Lord, I don't know if it was just me, but this area was complete horseshit. I don't know what it was, because at this point, I was pretty comfortably moving through the game without much issue, but man, this trial absolutely wrecked me. I'm not sure if it was the enemies in it being scaled differently in some way, the modifiers, or what, but I'm really curious to see if anyone else has had a similar experience. Now, this is an early thoughts video, and I haven't actually experienced the endgame content known as maps for myself yet, so that could affect my overall opinion of the game once I get to them, but man, I gotta say, for the price of $30, I'm really enjoying what I've played here so far. Let me know your thoughts on PoE2 down below, and as always, thanks for watching. Until next time.